That's great. Thank you, Skip.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Jessie Barton of Helion here in Everett, and she's going to talk about the progress that Helion has made. So Jessie, a little introduction yourself, your position, and please give your talk. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Skip. And thank you to everyone for joining in this afternoon call, especially as we transition to fall. It's always nice to get a chance to connect. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I am Jessie Barton. I am the Director of Communications at Helion. And Helion is a startup company, and I'll give you a whole spiel on that. But what it means to be a director of communications at a startup company in general means that you get to wear lots of hats. And for me, that means all of our external facing communications. So anything on our website, our social media, news, media, outreach, but then also a lot of the stuff involved in getting connected with community groups and doing community outreach. For me, that looks like outreach in Snohomish County and in the broader Washington state area. I was actually at a Snohomish CCL meeting, thanks to Skip, 2 years ago. I don't know exactly to the day or not, but at that time I was pretty new in my role, 2 or 3 months, and now I've been at Helion for 2.5 years. So I'm hoping I'm coming with more experience, more answers to your questions, and more information about Helion from then on. So if you guys don't mind, I'll go ahead and bring up a presentation and get started. All right, I'm hopeful you can see that. So
yes, we can.
Great. So as I mentioned, Helion is a fusion energy company, and I heard earlier someone mention that I don't really look very nuclear. So I think that it's important that we start with just talking about what fusion in general is. And I know that Skip knows the answer to this, but I'm curious to hear if anyone else can give me the quick summary of fusion.
Is it a difference between imploding and exploding, maybe?
It probably wouldn't be the two contrasts I would make, but I can kind of see where you're going. Any other guesses or?
It's how the sun energizes itself.
Yeah. So John mentioned that it's how the sun energizes itself, and that's true. So fusion is the process of bringing small atoms together. In our case, fusion is the opposite of fission. So typically when we're talking about nuclear power or nuclear energy, we're talking about fission power. So fission is done whenever you take really big atoms like uranium or plutonium and you split them apart. Same thing with what TerraPower does. I think who was it earlier? Chuck was mentioning that you're going to have TerraPower come speak in the next couple of weeks. TerraPower is a fission company that's working on small modular reactors. Helion is a fusion company. So we do a lot of things very different. And the main thing that's different is that we push atoms together. So instead of breaking apart uranium or plutonium, we actually combine isotopes of hydrogen and helium. And if you have kept up to date with your chemistry, or your molecules or your atomic table, you would know that those are the two lightest elements in our universe. And as John Moore started to say, it's how our sun makes energy. It's how our sun makes energy. It's how all of our stars make energy, but they do it in a pretty special way that makes it hard to do on Earth. However, the things that make fusion really exciting for energy production on Earth is the fact that it doesn't produce any carbon. It's a nuclear process, so there's no carbon like there would be from fossil fuels. It's a chance to create always-on electricity, so it can be a baseload power source. And as opposed to fission, fusion has very limited radioactive waste. So one of the concerns we often hear about nuclear, or people who are against nuclear, is that it has really hard to store radioactive waste. A lot of times in the case of fission, you're looking at waste that lasts on the order of tens of thousands of years to decay, which obviously is hard to manage. With fusion, there is a radioactive byproduct, but it is a byproduct called tritium, which is an isotope of hydrogen, which has a half-life of 12.5 years. So we're looking at totally different timescales when we're talking about waste for fusion and fission. That's a little bit in the weeds, and I'm happy to go into that later. But as a really quick overview of fusion, it's just the process of combining atoms to make energy. So giving that quick baseline, do we have any questions on fusion, what that looks like, how that works? If not, I'll jump in. So for decades, scientists have been working to create fusion on Earth in order to create energy that is basically limitless. You can take, again, isotopes of hydrogen that are found in seawater to combine atoms to make energy in the process. And Helion has been working on creating energy in its fusion machines. But we do that in a different way than a lot of other fusion devices might do. I've got two examples here, just in case anyone is a little bit familiar with fusion. These are the two types of fusion machines that you might have come across before. So the picture on the left is of something called the Joint European Torus, which is a big donut-shaped fusion machine that tries to create a plasma to keep atoms inside and fusing for a long time. So basically it tries to make this big donut of plasma in order for fusion to occur. The reason that it does that is that, like we mentioned, the sun creates fusion, but the sun is really big and it has a really big gravitational force. So it's able to bring atoms together using its gravity. In machines that we make on Earth to do fusion, we have to keep plasmas very hot for very long amounts of times. For our case, in our case, that means that we have to keep a gas in plasma state at around 100 million to 200 million degrees in order for that fusion to occur. And that has to be that hot because we don't have the same amount of gravity. So that's what this machine on the left is trying to do, is create a plasma that can be stable enough for long enough at hot enough temperatures for fusion to happen. A really big example of this, if you're interested to know more about magnetic confinement fusion, like shown in the left picture, is a project that is in France called it's called ITER, I-T-E-R. It's the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor is what the title ITER stands for. And it's a really big multinational project that's been going on since the 90s to build a tokamak capable of creating more energy out of a system than you put into the system. That's a really key thing that I might have missed early on, is that scientists have been working on fusion for a really long time, but the hard part about it is getting more energy out of the system than they put into the system. So we're still in this stage right now where we're trying to figure out what machine can do that the best in order to put clean electricity on the grid. The tokamak, which is the magnetic confinement fusion example I have on the left, is one way to do that. Another example of this was at the National Ignition Facility, which is where they use a bunch of lasers in order to ignite a pellet that is very small, the size of this pin tip, which would be filled with deuterium and tritium, and heat that up so that way it creates this fusion reaction. In this case, again, it's not because it isn't the sun and it's not big enough to have a huge gravitational field. It creates very high temperatures from those lasers in a very targeted amount of space in order for fusion to happen. This is called inertial confinement fusion, and it's using lasers to make that fusion happen. If you've been keeping up with the news at all in December, there's a good chance that you might have seen something come out of the National Ignition Facility, which is at Lawrence Livermore National Lab in California. And this is the first time that scientists recorded a net positive energy creation from a fusion reaction. This was huge because, like I said earlier, scientists have been working on making fusion something that we could do and get more energy out than in for decades. And that was a proof of concept that, like, it is just possible that we could do this. We knew it was possible because the sun and all of our stars do it every day and night for a very long time. But this was the first showing that a human could build something that could do this. And it was really an incredible feat scientifically. However, if you continued reading into that, you might have picked up on some backside of the news that this is really great for science, but it's not necessarily that impressive for creating electricity for the grid. The amount of energy that they created was more in the pellet, but they didn't count all of the energy they took from the wall to power those lasers. nor is that system really built to create electricity. It's really a research facility for the government, and they're not really looking to create electricity from it. It's really just a proof of concept. So that's a little bit about magnetic confinement fusion, which is that tokamak on the left. And then there's this inertial confinement fusion, which is where you use lasers. Both of these are pictures of national labs. So these are projects that are worked on by both the US government, a lot of other governments, including China, Russia, the UK, Canada, the US, Germany, Italy. There's fusion programs kind of going on everywhere. But the picture on the right is a picture of Helion's machine. And what we've done is we've taken these two concepts, taken the best of them to create a machine that is the most efficient system specifically for creating electricity for the grid. So instead of the two projects on the left, which are really focused on research, figuring out if we can do this, what our machine is built to do is to show not only can we do this, but can we do it in the way that the end user, you and I, actually care about, which is by getting electricity out of a system and getting more electricity than we put into the system. So the machine on the right there is called Trenta. It was our 6th fusion prototype that we built, and it was a really big proof of concept for us, which has enabled a lot of the progress that I'm going to talk about here today. So I know I just threw out a lot of information, but the purpose of that was just to lay some of the groundwork for what fusion is, different approaches to fusion, and how that creates what Helion is building. So Helion has built, like I said, 6 fusion prototypes, and our 6th fusion prototype here is called Trenta. It is what we call a magneto-inertial fusion machine, and it takes magnets to create a plasma and then accelerate them and compress them in a central chamber. So this is kind of an overview of how our technology works really quickly. If you look at the system, it's really one long tube that has magnets. So these green little lines here are all electromagnets that get powered by a capacitor bank, which is back here. It's represented back here. And those magnets create, some gas gets puffed in, and those magnets create a lot of energy in that gas. They turn it into a plasma, which is called ionization. They ionize the plasma, and then they turn on and accelerate these plasmas into a central chamber, where in the middle, there's really strong magnets to compress it to fusion conditions. Now, this all happens because there's things that are important with fusion. One, I mentioned that temperature. So we're trying to raise plasmas up to temperatures greater than 100 million degrees. We're trying to keep the plasma there long enough for fusion to occur. And then we're trying to keep the plasma dense enough in order for the atoms to get close enough in order to do that fusion process. So all of these steps help with all of those things. So they help keep the plasma stable long enough, help keep the plasma hot enough, heat the plasma even more, and get that plasma really close together. So it's a little bit how our system works, but in practice, what this really looks like here, you can watch in this video. Hopefully it will be viewable through Zoom. So we can see we've got this plasma that's created once the gas is puffed in. Magnets accelerate those plasmas into a central chamber where they're compressed by super strong magnets, and the atoms inside that plasma are being compressed, their temperature is raising, they're getting closer together, and then fusion happens. And there's something really special about our system, which I think you guys will think is very cool. Instead of using heat from the system to turn a steam turbine in order to create electricity, the type of fusion that we do allows us to directly recover electricity straight from the fusion that happens. There's this really cool principle in physics, I think this is incredible, that if you have a change in magnetic field, you induce a current back through a coil. So the products of our fusion reaction create a charged particle that allow for that to happen. And just like if you have an electric vehicle and you're braking, that's magnets recharging a battery. That same thing happens basically in our system, where the fusion happens. The charge goes back through a coil, and in each of our coils, you've got these wires that are connected to a capacitor bank. Capacitors, if you don't know, are just like batteries, but they release energy very quickly rather than slowly. And they recharge the capacitors. And if we've done fusion and we've done enough fusion and we've done it right, then we create more electricity out of the system. So we top up those capacitors, and then we have a little bit extra that can be sent to the grid for commercial use. All of this happens, by the way, in less than 1/1000th of a second. It's a very quick pulse, and then we keep pulsing it. And it's those several bits of pulses that are what help us create electricity. That's how our system works, but I mean, all of that is really cool theoretically. Like, let's actually talk about our results. So to date, we've built 6 fusion machines. You've seen already 2 pictures of Trenta. This is also a picture of Trenta. And Trenta has, this machine itself pulsed more than 10,000 times over 2 years. So in a full system, these would be pulsing, once a second, up to 10 times every second. For these machines, they're still experimental. We're still figuring out the best way to build the machines, the best way to optimize how much fusion we can get out of the system. So we would run this, once every 10 minutes, gather the diagnostics, understand the results of it, in order to see how well we did our fusion and if we could improve it. But we did that, those 10,000 shots over the course of 2 years, and we kept the machine under vacuum and operated everything remotely for a year and a half, which is really important because that just showed that our system was reliable. It worked the way we expected it to work without breaking every time. And that's a pretty good sign that things are going well while you're also doing fusion, which is great. In this machine, we reached temperatures greater than 100 million degrees Celsius. This is really important because that's the temperature that you need in order to be doing enough fusion for it to be relevant for commercial conditions. So for grid use, for instance. And then we've done fusion in a couple of different types of fuels. This is a little, again, in the weeds, but that you can use different types of gases to do fusion. And we've done it in all deuterium gases, and we've also done it in deuterium and helium-3 gas. So that's a little bit about Trenta, but the really exciting thing that we're working on now, which is in Snohomish County, we're located in Everett, just across from the Boeing facility. So 5 minutes down the road from the Future of Flight Museum. And everything else that we've done previously has been in Redmond. So we moved to Everett in 2022, early last year. And now we've been building our 7th machine. And the 7th machine for us, it's called Polaris. The goal of Polaris is to do enough fusion and build everything so efficiently that we create electricity from fusion for the first time and do it in a way that creates more electricity than we put into the system. This will be the first time that anyone has done that. So I mentioned earlier, the National Ignition Facility had their big break-even moment. Again, that was just creating energy, but they weren't doing anything with that energy. What we're looking to do is to create electricity that could be used for the grid. This one will not be producing electricity for the grid. It's still a proof of concept, but being able to show that you can create electricity from fusion is a huge step for humanity, especially because, again, it's carbon-free and it's baseload power. The things we're doing now to prepare for Polaris, we're optimizing all of our technology. So making sure we can get enough fusion out of our system as we can. We're scaling what our manufacturing looks like. So that way, when we get ready to build our first one, we can build more than just one. We can build several, so we can roll these out into the world very quickly. And then we are starting to install the full Polaris prototype. And all of these pictures show pieces of Polaris. So these are some capacitors going into an oven here. These coils are the electromagnetic coils that are around our system that control the plasmas. Here is a big quartz tube, which is used to divert all the gases out of our system. So there's lots of really cool pieces and parts of the puzzle here. But the really exciting thing, and probably the biggest update that I would have since our last meeting, is that we have announced the world's first power purchase agreement with Microsoft. And this means that Microsoft has agreed to purchase electricity from our fusion system, which is expected to be complete and start producing electricity in 2028. So this is 5 years away, which is much sooner than most people predict there to be fusion on the grid. And the way that this system works is that Microsoft will be the off-taker. Constellation, which is a big power marketer, will be the one that counts the energy and then markets it to Microsoft. It'll be somewhere in Washington. We haven't announced where this first plant will be, and it will be outputting at least 50 megawatts. And for context, 50 megawatts in Washington is around 40,000 homes. So it's enough to power, you know, a small town or a small data center, in this case with Microsoft. So really the kind of big takeaways here is that fusion is a type of energy that produces zero carbon. It's been something that's really challenging, but our team has been after for 10 years now. We have a team of 200 people. We've raised $577 million to do this. And we are now partnered with a really big partner, specifically in Washington State, in order to help decarbonize particularly hard areas to decarbonize. So I'm going to stop there because I'll say that was a quick overview, and I'm sure you have questions and I'd love to answer them now.
This is a nuclear fuser I built a couple of months ago.
Oops.
Yeah.
How big is that unit that you built?
I'm sorry.
The Trent, is it called? What's it called? The unit that you built? How big?
Trenta?
Yeah.
Trenta is about 40 feet long and about 6 feet high.
And is the chamber, is that, can you see the chamber? Is it transparent?
So the chamber, yes, sort of. So the inside wall of the machine is actually made out of quartz or fused silica. So it's actually a clear wall, but then it's surrounded by a bunch of electromagnets that you can't really see the tube from outside.
You got stuff in the way.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff in the way. But if you are interested, I heard it sounds like you were starting to watch a video from the Plasma channel, but there's another video by Real Engineering that does a really good deep dive into Trenta. So if you look up Helion Real Engineering, that's there's like a 25 to 30-minute explanation next to the machine of how it works, how it operates, that really digs into the technology. And that's with our CEO, who does a much better job than I do at explaining stuff because he is a nuclear engineer and physicist. And then I think in the Plasma channel video, you can see some of that quartz in a specific section, which is called our diverter, which is where all the gases are exhausted out of the system.
So how do you
John,
guys?
you got a question.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, John.
Yeah,
What was it?
my question is this: 100 million degrees C. That's hotter than I see on my stovetop. Tell me, how is it that you contain these temperatures without all known metals in the chart melting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 100 million degrees, yes. If you didn't know, really hot, super hot, it's hotter than the surface of the sun. It is very hot. So what we do is there's not really any material that can handle that type of temperature. So those magnets are really important, and the magnets protect the wall from that temperature hitting the material that the plasma faces. So something kind of interesting is that plasma has its own it has its own magnetic field because it's a bunch of electrons ripped off of their nuclei, which means that it itself kind of acts like a magnet. And then you've got these magnets, these coils around the machine that are also magnets. And you know how if you have like two north-facing magnets, they don't really hit each other and they repel? You've kind of got a similar situation here where the magnets are confining that plasma and keeping it from escaping. So that's one way. But another thing to keep in mind is that fusion is very hard, and keeping things at that temperature is very hard too. So if let's say the plasma escapes that magnetic field, it cools instantly, meaning that as soon as it hits the wall, you're looking at much, much colder gas than 100 million degrees.
Yeah, it's a very small mass that you're talking about, and it's a very quick pulse. So it's not a sustained 100 million degrees. It's, just I'm not sure, it's smaller than a postage stamp, smaller than a thumbnail, I'm sure.
Oh, yes, yeah. I have the actual volume, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. And let me write a note and see if I can find that, because it is a surprisingly small amount of gas. We have a liter of deuterium that we work with, and that will typically last us between 3 and 6 months for testing. That's not necessarily commercial systems, but it's a very small input. And then also, yeah, cools very quickly. But Chuck, to your point, we do have a lot of concerns about that inside wall, and we want that wall to be strong and protected, and we want to do as much as we can to limit the amount of damage that's done to that wall, which could be from heat, it could be from byproducts from the fusion process. So there are a lot of things that go into what that first wall looks like and what we can do to make it as strong as possible.
Mark, you had a question.
Yeah, magnetic containment has been an issue that has vexed the industry since at least the 1960s and 1970s, since I've been following it. What makes you think that you've got it somehow down this time, where literally the best scientists in the world, literally all over the world, have been trying to get this one fixed?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And the short answer to that is that our machine is pulsed. So you are removing some of the challenges of keeping a plasma confined for a very long amount of time. And the longer explanation there is that in a tokamak, where you've got just straight magnetic confinement, you're trying to keep a plasma stable for as long as possible. You're trying to keep it continually burning for minutes, hours, days at a time. And plasma in that state, it wants to go in lots of different places, and you can hear a lot about plasma instabilities. By using a machine that's pulsed, we're doing that much faster, so the plasma isn't needing to stay as stable. It's not needing to stay stable for long amounts of time. Instead, we're just trying to keep it stable for, I mean, I can't even do it as fast as how fast we're trying to keep it stable, just fast enough for it to expand and extract that electricity out. But you asked another kind of interesting piece of that question, which was, you know, scientists have been working on this for ages. Why do you feel like you can do this now? A really interesting tidbit around Helion's technology is that it was theorized about as early as I think the first paper is like 1972 or 1973, that said that this would be a really efficient way to do fusion. However, we didn't have the right like power electronics. We didn't have fiber optic cables. We didn't have the right thing like technologies outside of fusion in order to operate one of these machines. And it wasn't really until the last, 10 to 15 years that those technologies came around that made it even possible to build a machine like they theorized. So there's like some pieces of, the real world catching up to theory, some pieces of theory following the real world that make us. We were the first fusion company to reach 100 million degree plasma temperatures, which is a pretty big feat. And those are the things that make us confident that we can solve a lot of the problems that have come up with other approaches to fusion.
Excellent, Jessie. Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. And they've made some great strides in magnetic containment. MIT and what is it, General Fusion? Anyway, they've increased magnetic field strengths by, I think, almost an order of magnitude. So it's pretty amazing. Jim Bloss.
Yes, this is more not a personal question, but kind of. I have a 9-year-old granddaughter, and I'm trying to convince her to be all she can be. And I think I'd almost use you as an example of where a person could go and get involved in stuff that you would ordinarily think a woman might be involved with. I mean, at least in the olden days.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask, what kind of education, training, or whatever have you been through to be appear this knowledgeable?
Well, I appreciate it. That's very kind for you to say. I have to start with, I'm a small town girl from the Ozarks. I'm from Branson, Missouri. If anyone...
Yes, I'm from St. Louis.
No way. Yeah, my brother lives there. Yeah. So I'm from Branson, graduated from Branson High School. I was very fortunate. I got a scholarship to run cross country in college, and I think that sports for me was really important. But beyond that, getting education, my education is in communications. And then I worked for a couple of years, but then went back to grad school, and I did a master's in communication at Purdue. And for me, there were a lot of engineers around, and it was it was awesome for me because it was a chance for me to do what I really like, which is communications. I love presenting. I love explaining things. I love writing. But I also really love hearing from people who are way smarter than me, like engineers. So got to be around a lot of those at Purdue. And I think part of that is never being scared to ask a question and never feeling like you're too dumb to ask a question. And I think I got very fortunate at Helion that I knew that I was not the smartest person there and everyone else did. So there was no fear to ask questions and people give me answers. So asking a lot of questions.
You haven't
Great,
you
Jesse.
haven't answered a question that has been asked. I mean you haven't failed to answer a question that's been asked. So I mean, like as if you were a nuclear engineer or something.
Yeah, I guess that's the other side is when I don't have the answer, I get to go ask one of our people and then I listen. So that way I know the answer for next time.
Listening is all very important.
Mhm.
Thank you.
So Don, you got a question.
Yes, I wondered if the system right now is operating in a pulsed fashion, and I gather it's going to be in its feeding capacitors.
Mhm.
Is it going to be running on a more semi-continuous basis when it is, generating 50 megawatts, or is it still running like at 120 cycles per second or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as I understand, the way that you can scale up the output that you're doing based on the number of pulses that you're doing. So if you had a 50 megawatt system, I don't know what the pulses per second are for a 50 megawatts system specifically, but you could scale that all the way up to 500 megawatts, either by pulsing faster, building a bigger capacitor bank, or a combination of the two.
Thanks.
Excellent. I've got a couple quick questions. Jess, is the Trenta actually fusing?
Yeah, so Trenta did fusion.
Oh,
But
it
it's
is.
but we're not operating it anymore. So we started to disassemble it earlier this year, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, so for 2.5 years, you were running it, what you might say continuously, pulsing it every 10 minutes
Mhm.
and fusing every time you pulsed it.
Yeah, we wouldn't have, I don't think I don't have the confidence to say that we fused every time we pulsed, but we did do fusion very often. Like, I don't have the stats on how many were fusion pulses versus, because it was still experimental. Sometimes you go
Right.
to fire something and then it doesn't happen as you expected it to happen. So maybe we didn't do fusion in every pulse, but did do fusion in a lot of those pulses. I think that's answering your question, right?
No, you have, and you did not try to contain or convert, I should say, that the resulting plasma to electricity. All you did was fuse at the time, and Polaris will be the first time that you actually convert to electricity, as you said. Is that correct?
Yeah. So part of our process of iterating on the technology is we've built, like I said, 6 different machines, but they each have proven a different piece of the puzzle. So Trento was really looking at as close to what a full system would look like if we built it to scale, and Polaris will be pretty much similar in size. How much fusion can we do? But the machine, we had a machine 2 times before that was really just looking at how efficient can we build the capacitor through coil back to capacitor system. So what does the energy recovery, or sorry, the electricity recovery process look like through a pulsed system, which involves really great switching technology that's very specific to Helion. So charging a capacitor up, switching electricity through a coil, but then switching that back into the capacitor, which is a hard thing to do. We've got several different pieces of the system that have been built over time, and Polaris is putting all of that together.
Excellent. Thank you, Jesse. Chuck, you got another question?
Yeah, do you, here we go. Do you, I heard you mention startup money, 500 million or whatever. Do you have a deep pocket guy like Bill Gates behind you somewhere? And secondly, is this process something that you would patent? Is there a patent discussion that comes in here to protect your technology?
Yeah. So we do have some pretty big investors. Do you guys know about ChatGPT or OpenAI company by chance? Yeah, so OpenAI's CEO's name is Sam Altman, and Sam Altman is our biggest investor. Sam Altman has invested, he, like I said, is the CEO of OpenAI, but he's also invested in some other pretty big up and coming companies, but Helion is his largest investment to date. And then people like Dustin Moskovitz, who was a co-founder of Facebook. Then you've got Reid Hoffman, who's a co-founder at LinkedIn. So a couple of big names in there. That is all I think available on our website if you want to check that out some more. And then your other question was on patents, and we do patent some of our technology. Protecting our technology is important, specifically when we think about energy availability around the world and energy independence. We understand that it's important that we build as quickly as we can so we can give everyone access to this, but then also want to make sure that we build in a way that keeps the US competitive and being able to give energy to the world. A really interesting tidbit is that Helion released a paper on our results in 2015. And a couple of years later, there was a machine that looked just like ours. It was called HE Long, which sounds a lot like Helion, on a Chinese website that is focused on doing fusion development. So that's like stuff like that that makes us feel really careful and protective of what our technology, how much of our technology we let out into the public.
Very good, Jess. And Mark, you got a quick question.
Yeah, it's going to have to be quick, running out of time. Is there a sense for how quickly you could ramp up once you've got an absolute proof? For example, do you have a sense for how long it would take to build the machines that would allow you to power Washington?
Yeah, this is really important to us. We recognize you need more than just one fusion power plant in the world. So earlier this year, our CEO spoke in front of Congress to ask for assistance in deploying at broad scale in the United States what this looks like. So that is a little bit of mass manufacturing. So we could envision a large facility dedicated solely to building capacitors. And then right now we're also talking to regulators in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and beyond about creating a licensing and regulatory structure that would allow these to be regulated much like how airplanes are regulated, which is a design-specific license. So instead of like how a nuclear fission plant right now is regulated, where each one needs to go through the regulation process, you would have a design that would be basically made on an assembly line. And that design is passed through licensing, so you could build and deploy as fast as we can. In terms of like real timeline, it's a little hard to say, but we talk at our company, we talk about being able to deploy one of these a day in the mid 2030s. And that's what we're building our system up to do, is to build a mass manufacturing facility so we can assemble them like airplanes.
And thank you, Mark. Great question. Great question. What about licensing and the approval of the design? Are you under the scrutiny of the NRC? Or are you? Okay, go ahead, Jess. If you could address that.
Yeah. So we have been working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for a really long time, and early this year, in I think April, they announced a decision to regulate fusion separately from fission. So this was really big. So basically, they just said, "Hey, we get that fusion is different from fission, so they should be regulated in different ways." Right now, we're under a byproducts material framework, which is the same framework that a hospital is under. So that means for us that Washington State at the moment, the Department of Health is who regulates us. They're who we've had regulate our last two machines anyway. So for us, it's pretty seamless. We just get to continue the process. But we also recognize that if we're going to be building a lot of these, that means we need to bring support into the state to help with regulating these in the future. So right now, that's what we're working. Our regulatory team, not me so much, I'm in those conversations, but working on making sure we have a good path for that moving forward, because we know that that's a big barrier to energy anywhere. That and interconnection, two things that are going to be tough.
So you, how much of a challenge do you think the regulatory approval is going to be?
Well, this decision in April was really helpful for regulatory approval for now. All like first power plants, so our power plant with Microsoft, for instance, will be regulated under that byproducts material framework. And when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of that regulation, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, but if you're interested in connecting more on that, I can connect you with our regulatory team. And like I said, Jim Conca is coming out in October, so he'll get a look at our facility, and our GR team should be out here too.
Excellent, Jess. Thank you, Jessie.
Yeah.
Any other questions, anybody? We've got 5 minutes to cover the rest of our agenda.
Yeah, apologies for taking so much time, but I'm hoping that means that you're interested.
Not at all, not at all. This has been wonderful, Jessie. It really has been. Thank you for coming out. You answered all our questions perfectly. And yes, you've certainly gained in knowledge and comfort with the material since the last time you visited us. And I look forward to having you back again, perhaps next year after Polaris is up and running.
Yeah, it'd be great.
And it would be wonderful to have you. If you want to stay for the rest of our brief meeting, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, I'll stick around.
Okay, very good. All right, I'll briefly share my screen. Let's see. That's not it. This is it here. Okay, you can see our agenda, and that was Jessie. And then I just want to mention the Whidbey Island Climate Week this week. There's a lot going on there, and I'll show you. Let me stop sharing that. I'll show you the activities that are going on this week. One of which is an En-ROADS presentation that I'll be helping to facilitate. And but there's something for everybody, as they say. Boy, let's see. I'm not seeing it. I gotta show all windows here, and there it is. It's a PDF. I'll share that. You should have gotten this in my email, and so it's already kicked off. And you missed, unless you attended, you missed the Coffee and Climate, family, especially for children and families. Then there's all kinds of activities the following days. Julie Nowak of Whidbey Island has done a great job putting this together. And like I said, at 7 o'clock on Thursday, if you want to join us, we're doing an En-ROADS climate workshop where you can explore your solutions to solving climate change. And it's a great tool. MIT and Climate Interactive have collaborated on that tool. If you haven't seen it, everybody can use it. That's one of the nice things about showing up to this workshop. Will help you to understand how to use the tool, give you a little bit of an introduction, and then you can go and look at it yourself anytime. You can look at it right now if you want. And then there is the rest of the activities, as you can see, that you'll be able to look at those with the attachment. Let's see, what is left on our agenda from that? Let's see. Okay, so the CCL September action sheet and monthly call video. You might want to watch that video with Madeline McGill. It's great. You'll love it. Very much reminds me of the accomplishments of Jessie. She's built up quite a coalition of rural area folks, and is doing just wonders. And then so you're invited to the to join the Great School Electrification Challenge. You can take a look at that in the attachment. There's a CCL inclusion conference that we've missed now. CCL VP Ben Pendergrass was in the NBC News article. That's fun to see that we're getting that kind of attention. And there's policy specifics pinned at the top of the 4 CCL community site-wide forums: carbon pricing, clean energy, permitting, healthy forests, and building electrification and efficiency. As you know, those are our 4 focal agendas for 2023. And then don't forget, if you've signed up for it, the Washington CCL conference coming up on the 22nd to the 24th, Rainbow Lodge in North Bend. I know Mark, Jim, and I are going. Anybody else going to that from the group? No, you missed out. Okay, well, these things are fun. Nice retreat, beautiful area. Chuck, you going?
Just look, let me interrupt. You know, they have a 1-day special that you can go up just for the day. Are you
I didn't
aware of
know
that?
Is that still open?
Yes, they still have open slots for that. So you can arrive you arrive by 10:30, and you have the first program, then lunch, then the whole afternoon program, then dinner, which is probably over about 7:30, and then you can leave and go home, all for $99.
Fantastic. Can you pay at the time, or are they asking for an RSVP?
I would. You should really email Ellie before Saturday to make a reservation, so she knows that you're coming and they can plan for the meal, and so forth.
Okay, that's a great input, Chuck. Thank you. Appreciate that. And then let's see what we've been up to. Probably not enough time. We're running over, but Mark, you got a 30-second statement of what you've been doing?
I think we probably need to wrap this one up. I'm not sure I can do it in 30 seconds. Let's, yeah, we're already over time.
Okay. Jim, you want to add anything?
Just to say that I'm going to be at the conference. I'll be moderating a good workshop.
Oh yeah, permitting workshop. Yeah. Fantastic. And so just some good news for those that are feeling like they need some good news. I don't know if you've heard, but California is now suing the oil companies, and that's going to be a big deal. So we'll have to stay tuned on seeing how that turns out. But litigation is always the way these major changes, whether it be from lead poisoning to tobacco, starts with litigation to really get the ball rolling and world attention. And so this should be good. 5th largest economy in the world. And they're suing the oil companies. And then on a technical side, I don't know if you guys know what graphene is, but it's a 1 atom thick a carbon layer. And they've found that if you stack those layers, you can make batteries. It's for the anode on the battery, I believe. If you stack those layers, you can make the batteries more powerful. So they found that out years ago. But they're starting to build some batteries with it now, and it can make them up to 10 times more efficient. So you probably expect at least a doubling once you get it into commercial production. And then they've just recently discovered that the wrinkles in the graphene surfaces are sites where the protons can migrate, which is a natural process that you can use to create hydrogen. All you have to do is add an electron. So Jessie probably knows all about that, what it takes to, in a ionized state of protons, to add the electrons, the amount of energy. And anyway, you can get hydrogen out of that. So look for some big developments out of that. And that's everything, folks. Anybody want to add anything else? Well, we're 5
Thank you,
minutes over.
Jessie.
And what's that?
Thank you,
Don?
Jessie.
Yes, thank you for coming,
yeah.
Jessie.
Oh, yeah. Big thanks to Jessie.
Thank you,
She's
Jessie.
done a
Thank you, Skip.
wonderful job.
Thanks so much.
you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay, have a wonderful fall, everybody. And stay strong. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.